Welcome back to All Business Media TV, where it's all business all the time. Here's your host, Rick Delgado.
And welcome to All Business Media presents Remaining Resilient with Katherine Myers. I'm your host, Rick Delgado. Katherine Myers is our guest. She's joining us in the studio today. Katherine, welcome back, and how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. And just to tell everybody who Katherine is, she's the owner of Resiliency Counselor. You can go to her website, resiliencycounselor.com. That's resiliencycounselor.com. You can also give her a call, 937-405-5795. And Katherine, now this is a new business venture for you, correct?
Yes, it is.
Now tell us a little bit about exactly what you're going to be doing, as the owner of Resiliency Counselor.
As the owner of ResiliencyCounselor.com, I offer online opportunities for encouragement, getting to know people and helping them through difficult situations. Mm-hmm. We can do it through Skype, in person if they live in Dayton, Ohio, or in that area. Okay. But I'm not limited to just being there because of technology.
Right.
We can do small groups. We can do larger groups through webinars. We can also do motivational counseling, motivational speaking.
Right.
That also works. I don't have to stay in Dayton. I can move around, just like I'm here in New York right now.
True.
So I am mobile. I can go anywhere I need to. So those are the three areas that I'm hitting. Mm-hmm. But I really like working with people and helping people, especially those who have experienced really difficult situations in their lives.
Right.
And it's something that I have experienced in my life, and I've come out of them and experienced how to be resilient myself. And I want to be able to share that with other people.
Well, that's great. Now let me ask you this, because you did mention you've had some issues where you've needed to be resilient yourself, right? And
right.
You've come out of them. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about you, your backstory. How did you end up, where you are now?
I was married for 42 years.
Mm-hmm.
I have a son who is now 39. He is quadriplegic and has been since he was 2. He started limping when he was 15 months old.
Oh, wow.
And lost all of his gross and fine motor control by the time he was 19 months old. His last day to walk was Christmas Day.
Oh.
And by the time he was 2, he'd also lost his speech. He was not expected to live to see 2 because he was deteriorating so quickly. He's quite a person, though. He stopped deteriorating, which was very surprised for his doctors. They thought he'd plateaued and he would come off of that plateau and eventually die. We were told to institutionalize him and forget about him before we got too close. Well, we were already way too close.
Well, yeah.
There was no way we would do that.
Right.
So we were anticipating that we needed counseling to deal with the fact we had a child who was terminally ill. Well, about 6 months to a year later, we realized he was not dying. He had stabilized, and we needed to learn how to cope with the fact he was going to live.
Right.
And we would have a child with a disability. And not just a disability, but a very significant disability because he could not do anything on his own.
Right.
And he is now 39. We went through having to learn how to do therapy with him, how to deal with the school systems with him, mm-hmm. How to do total care with him. And by total care, I mean feed him, dress him, bathe him, everything that would be involved with caring for a person through all of their growth and development. And that's not easy to do.
I would say no. Most people would probably, like you mentioned with the advice that the doctors had given you early on, most people probably would have taken that route of, let's just, do what the doctors say. They know better, and kind of, for lack of a better, there's no easy way to say it, that they forget about them. And that's a horrible way to approach something like that.
Well, and my husband and I were really determined that we were going to stay married. We checked some statistics, and at that time, 90% of parents of disabled children and terminally ill children ended up divorced.
Really?
And we were determined we were not going to become a statistic. So we sought counseling early on,
right.
But there weren't any other supports for families like ours, especially with him not being diagnosed. There wasn't any place we could seek to get help with him. I did get him tested when he was 2 to see if he could learn. And he easily recognized Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, all the Winnie the Pooh characters and things like that. And I was told, teach him.
Right.
So I enrolled him in an infant stimulation program and got him involved with other children very quickly, read to him all the time. But it was very taxing. I got him into a preschool program when he was 3 and said, yes, he can be untied for me for a little bit. And then I went back to work. But that took its toll on me also. My husband worked 60, 80 hours a week in sales, so he wasn't able to help out at home.
Right.
And our society at that time was very institutional focused. They were not focused on the best thing we can do is keep children like him at home.
Right.
That was very foreign to society at that time.
Well, again, referring back to what the advice your doctor had given you.
Right.
Is, basically, here you go, almost get rid of them.
Right.
And that's kind of shocking when you hear it.
Well, and at that time, anybody with any kind of severe mental handicap were put into institutions. We did not keep them at home.
Right.
We were getting close to the time frame when we started closing them, but we weren't there yet. And so that was still the mind frame. We would hide them at home. We kept him out in the front of the public. We took him everywhere we went. We educated him.
Right.
But it also took a major toll on our family. It had a major toll on my body. And by the time he was 8, I fell apart physically. My body pretty much broke down. I had severe asthma. By the time I would come home from the hospital, I would be home for 2 days and go right back in because my asthma was so brittle.
Oh, wow.
And that was from taking care of him again. And the doctors realized that what was happening was his care for me was taking its toll on me so badly that it was either place him outside the home or it was going to kill me.
Right.
And so we had to place him originally in an institution and then in foster care. My recovery lasted 8 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And I went through in that time frame the problems with my asthma, which continued through that whole 8 years. Developed chronic migraines. I had a muscle disease that hit. I went through a very severe syndrome that weakens all the muscles in your body, including your lungs, and can potentially weaken your heart as well. Went through a period where I was in a wheelchair. And along with a myopathy that weakened my legs as well due to the steroids I had to take for my asthma.
Right.
So I had to recover from all of that before we could even think about bringing him back home.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, that's quite a toll.
And
it's taken.
And along with that, I also developed some major problems with depression, which you can imagine with all of that and him not at home. We still had guardianship for him.
Right.
My husband was having to shoulder a lot of that responsibility, and I felt like a horrible mother.
While your husband was still trying to put in 60 to 80 hours
Exactly.
a week. Yeah.
Exactly. So the toll on us was extremely severe, and through some help from him, and then I had a doctor who really wanted me to be able to go back to work at some point.
Right.
I went through a work evaluation and said, you've got to have some strengthening before you can ever do anything. And my husband and I talked it over, and we decided I would go back to school.
Okay.
So I started taking one class at a time. And that started to strengthen my body.
Right. Now, when you started going to school, were you still in that 8-year period of being sick? And
very definitely.
At any point during that time, were you, again, you mentioned you were confined to a wheelchair as well, right?
Yes.
Were you thinking, oh my goodness, I could be stuck here?
Yes, I was.
I would imagine.
And that happened 2 or 3 times during that time frame where I was back in a wheelchair. And each time I was back in a wheelchair, I would hit my husband with, okay, how soon can I drive a car? Because I was very dependent on other people for everything, and I didn't like that, being dependent. And he's like, well, you can't drive a car like this. And I'm like, excuse me, watch me.
Yeah, I'm sitting down already.
And he's like, you're going to have to go through an evaluation before you can do that.
Right.
And each time I was like, okay, I've got to do something here. And I would strengthen myself back up and get to where I could at least walk with a walker. And I would go through the evaluation. They say, yes, you're safe enough to drive, which would satisfy him.
Okay.
And I'd get to where I could drive again. And then I would use a walker to get around places until I could walk.
Right.
And I'm one of these people who you tell me you can't. That's one way of getting me to do something.
Right.
Because you don't tell me I can't do something. That gets my back up. And I'm then really determined that I'm going to prove people wrong. And I am going to do it.
Right.
It's a kind of reverse psychology for me. If you tell me I can't, that's a way of being assured I will do it.
Right.
And it works.
Yeah.
Some people it doesn't. There's just no way it will happen.
Right.
But for me, it's a way of assuring that it will, because I am incredibly stubborn. My son is too.
Well, those are great traits to have.
They are. They really are. And for me, it really works.
Yeah.
And so that stubbornness played out, and I was able to go back to school, and I took one class at a time. Mm-hmm. That's when the migraines set in, and I had a doctor who told me, you'll never be able to take more than one class at a time. Well, that didn't last very long.
There you go, another doctor with a great diagnosis for you, saying you can't do something.
And the last 2 years I was in school, I averaged, we were on quarter hours, and I took 17, 15, and 17 credit hours a quarter. And my husband made me promise, after I did that for the first year I was back, he said, don't do that again. And I said, I won't. And then I did my last year, and I justified it by, okay, one class I'm finishing what I did during the summer, mm-hmm. and then I had my internship, and then I did an independent study too. And I said, so it's not really being in class, I'm just finishing the credit hours. Right. And he was like, okay, yeah, right. But I still finished. And in doing so, during the internship that I had to do, mm-hmm. I worked for the Office of Disability Services at the university where I work, which is Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. And I worked for their Disability Services Department. And I showed them that they needed someone who understood assistive technology, which is what my son uses to communicate. Right. Okay? And I showed them they needed someone with that kind of background for their department. I worked in their assistive technology lab for 2 quarters. Right.
And this was part of a class you were taking?
This was for my practicum. This satisfied my senior project. Okay. And I did that for 20 hours a week, 2 quarters in a row. Right. And the students with severe physical disabilities would come in and seek help, where before they wouldn't come in and use the lab. And what we found out was they were afraid that if they asked for help at the help desk, mm-hmm. like everybody else, right. that they would make it appear that they didn't know much, and not as much as their peers did about computers. Right. And this was way back when it was DOS. This was before Windows. Okay, that's how old this is. Okay. But by me being in there, it showed everybody that they needed help, but they needed to know where to go. Right. And they would come and seek it out if they knew who to ask. Right. So that summer, they rewrote a couple of job descriptions because they had one person leaving the department. And that fall, I was able to compete for the job and actually got hired. That's great. And by then, my husband and I were looking at how we could bring Rob home. And he actually had major surgery that fall. Mm-hmm. His foster family was getting very weak in how they were handling things, and we weren't real happy with them. Right.
And again, to remind everybody, your son right now, you're going through your, healing. Right. Towards the end of that 8 years, he's been, in foster care all that time, right?
He has. And we would bring him home on weekends. Right. We could have him anytime we wanted to. Mm-hmm. And we would bring him home on weekends. And I could tell the stress that he was going through by what he wanted to do on those weekends. Right. He loved comedies. We all did. We brought him up on comedies, on slapstick comedy especially. And he would want to veg out watching Home Improvements with Tim Allen. Right. And so that he could just sit there and laugh and relieve his stress. And we knew that it was because he was stressing out because of things in the foster family. Right. So we knew he was getting more stress, things were deteriorating there, and we needed to bring him home. So that fall, right after I started working and as he recovered from his surgery, we'd already brought him home right before his surgery. Mm-hmm. We put things in place and were able to get things situated so that he actually was home after his surgery.
Right. Now you're taking, it seems like you're lumping everything on. It's like a perfect storm. You've got him coming out of foster care. you're still kind of recovering now, right?
I
because
am.
You're not you haven't told me the part where you're fully recovered. You weren't fully recovered at that
I
point.
wasn't.
And you had just finished school and started a job.
And started a full-time job. And we knew, though, that I could not take care of him when he came home.
Right.
And when his foster family actually kicked him out of the house right before his surgery because they were mad at us. And I was like, what are we going to do? And that summer, I conducted a computer camp for high school kids with disabilities. Mm-hmm. Rob took part in that camp. Well, I got to know some of our personal assistants from Wright State who work with our students with severe physical disabilities with their personal care through that program.
Right.
And I thought, okay, wait a minute. Let me call these guys, because they fell in love with Rob when they worked with him for that program.
Right.
And I called a couple of them. They said, what can we do to help? So I had one of them come out in the mornings, help get him up, help me get him to school, and then another one who came out in the evenings and helped put him to bed. And then while he was in the hospital for 6 weeks after his surgery, we were interviewing personal assistants for him while we were in the hospital.
Right.
Found a couple and then hired a couple from Wright State to be able to take care of him when he came home. And the supports that the foster family had used moved over to our access so that we were able to handle bringing him home.
Right.
So I didn't have to handle all of his care, which we knew wasn't going to work. And then I was reasonably recovered.
Getting there.
By the time he came home from the hospital. But we also had this very little house that we brought him into.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, now what kind of situation were you moving him back into? Was it the same house? Did you have to make accommodations to that house?
We brought him into a little 1,200 square foot house.
Oh, my goodness.
That was wall-to-wall furniture.
Right.
And we joked around that if you wanted to change your mind, you had to go outside to do it.
Right.
Because you couldn't do it in the house, because turning around was an issue.
Yeah.
And we brought him home with visiting nurses, equipment, personal assistants, and no place to put anything. So we were looking for a house, too, while he was in the hospital. My husband started looking.
Oh, and you know what? You know what's so cool about that, Catherine? Because that's not stressful at all.
Oh, no, it's not stressful whatsoever. It's not stressful at all. And my husband, I had gone home from the hospital one Sunday afternoon to get some rest, because I stayed at the hospital with him while I was working. And my husband called and said, I know you're supposed to go home and take a nap, but there's this house that's for sale that sounds like it would be ideal, even though it's out of our price range.
Right.
And there's an open house this afternoon. It would be really good if you could go look at it.
Did you go there and take a nap in the house?
No, I didn't go take it.
That would have been a good idea.
That would have been the best idea in the world. It would have, too. So I was like, okay. So I went and looked at it, because we had some major parameters on it. It had to be in a specific county, in the school district we were in, and which really limited where we could look.
Right.
So I went and I looked at it, and I was like, yeah, this is perfect, but it's out of our price range.
Right.
So I went back to the hospital, and I said, yeah, it's perfect, but we can't afford it. So then another week later, he went with our realtor and looked at the house. He said the same thing I did. It's perfect, but we can't afford it.
Right.
So then a couple weeks later, we were out looking at another house in the same plat that the realtor thought was perfect because it's all wheelchair accessible.
Right.
We didn't like it. And he looked at us, he said, have you two ever looked at this other house together? And we said, no. So he called, got us into that house that same morning.
Now, was this the house you both
This was the house that
was perfect, but just too expensive?
Too expensive.
Okay.
And so we both looked at it. And that weekend, we went home and we said, okay, how can we figure this out?
Right.
Because I had a brand new job. And he's like, okay, we figured out the numbers and we made an offer on the house. And she counted us and we accepted it. And we moved in a blizzard. We closed on New Year's Eve.
Right.
We moved in a snowstorm in January with foot-high snow. And the guys who were helping us was our Sunday school class at church. And they had said, as long as it's not ice, we can do this.
Right.
So they called us that morning and said, there's no ice. And we said, we're going to do this? And he said, yes, because he knew we had to get out of that house.
Right.
So we moved. And one of our aides for our son we made sure everybody saw it ahead of time. And they said, "Oh, this house is so big, you won't know how to do with all this space." And we're like, "Yeah, right. Everything from that house has to go in here." So he's walking around the house after we move in, and he's helping unpack things, and he's shaking his head as he's walking around. And we're like, "What's the matter, Tim?" And he goes, "If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed it." And we're like, "What?" "The fact that everything from that house fits in here and there's no extra space."
Right.
And we're like, "Yeah, we told you there wouldn't be any extra space when we came in here."
Wow.
And it was a 27 square foot house.
So it was more than double.
More than double the space, and everything fit that was in that other house.
That's
and we'd
crazy.
only bought 2 pieces of furniture when we
insane.
moved in. It was unbelievable.
And now that brings you to the point where now you're employed.
I'm employed.
You're in the new job.
I'm in the new job.
The son is back home.
And I want to quit the new job.
And you want to quit the new job.
Because of the pressures of it. When I started it, it was two jobs in one. It was heading up our tape center where we tape recorded books into for our students with learning disabilities, visual impairments.
Right.
And we physically tape recorded them. And I did the assistive technology. The person who did that job before was full-time tape recording, heading that up.
Right.
I was split between the two. I could do the AT part of it, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
I knew nothing about the tape recording.
Right.
And I was expected to know everything about the tape recording side of this with very little training on it. My student employees knew way more about it than I did.
Right.
Okay? The first 6 months of it, I kept going, why did I want this job? But then that summer, I was allowed to have a student employee work full-time for me. Because I had an assistant that worked 9 months of the year, and she wasn't there for the summer. They let me have her 40 hours a week for the summer, and I was able to turn it into my own. And I was able to set things up the way I wanted it for the summer. By the time she came back, we had the best start for fall quarter that we'd ever had. She was totally impressed. I was, because it actually worked. And I was able to then make it work.
Right.
And I was able to make both sides of it work. And since then, I've loved every minute of it. But that first 6 months was really horrible.
Oh, I can imagine. Now tell us, you're talking about the job you accepted. You were going to school at Wright State University, correct?
Yeah.
And you accepted the position there.
I did.
And you basically, within the first year, you were about to, throw yourself probably out of a window because it was driving you nuts.
Just about.
But then you were able to kind of turn around and make it your own.
Yeah.
And now what is it exactly? What's your title there? And what were you doing? Because you said it was the best start for a semester that they'd ever had. So what kind of things were you doing to really change it?
I was the Assistive Technology Specialist.
Okay, which means what?
And for that position, there were 2 parts. I worked with students on their assistive technology, which is technology for reading, for writing, for working on using for their environment, working with their wheelchairs, those kinds of things. That's the assistive technology part, but it was also running our tape center, which means coordinating our students and working with our faculty on getting their book request, finding out what textbooks they're using in advance so that we could get the books in and be able to get them recorded in time for the start of the semester.
Right. So you're talking about students with learning challenges and disabilities, right?
Different types of disabilities.
Okay.
A lot of them have learning disabilities, are visually impaired, and are blind students.
Okay.
And for some of the blind students, that meant getting some of their textbooks brailled, which we had to send off to with a contractor that we worked with.
Right. Now let me ask you this, because you did mention a little earlier that some of the technology that you started, I guess, bringing into Wright State was stuff that you were working with that your son was actually using, right? Was
Yes, and that's how I got into this in the first place. My son uses a communication device, and he got his first communication device when he was 12.
Right.
And at the time, I was majoring in computer engineering at Wright State, and I was not happy with it.
Okay.
And I fell in love with his technology, and I found out as I went to training for it that a lot of people were not getting adequate training. And as a result, devices of different types were being stuck into a closet and not being used.
Right.
Which I thought was terrible because these are expensive. And I decided that what I really wanted to do was more training of people.
Okay.
And so I went to my advisor, and he sent me to another person, and who sent me to disability services. And I was able to then change my major to rehab education and get them to agree to let me do any projects, any volunteer work in the assistive technology realm, and kind of create my own little niche there at the university, and kind of create my own little sub-major in order to specialize in the assistive technology.
Right. So that's what you took from whatever technology he was using.
Right.
You're like, you know what, this should be, available to all the students that are coming into Wright State.
Right.
Okay.
And I learned all the different devices we had in our assistive technology lab, and so that I could work with the students on that technology as well, not just what he uses.
Right. And so from that point forward, now that you've kind of created what you wanted, right? And you're starting that, you had that assistant for the summer, you got what you wanted, you set it up the way you wanted it.
Right.
And you had this semester kickoff, so to speak.
Yes.
And like you said, they said it was the best they ever had.
Yes.
Right? Because I guess you were getting access, or getting those students that needed that help, the access to the help that they needed so they could go to school.
I was getting that, but I was also getting good communication with our faculty and getting them to send me their book request early enough for me to get the books in, so we could get enough materials read for the students to have a good start. And so we were starting the quarter off without this having to get more books in.
Right.
We actually had them already in and started, and we weren't having to play catch up all the time.
Right.
Because when you're doing that kind of service, you're constantly having to catch up with where the student needs to be.
Right.
Because the faculty doesn't usually have their books ready, their book requests ready. You don't know what they're reading until the quarter or the semester starts, which is what we end up having to do most of the time.
Right.
And I had the communications set up with the faculty well enough in advance that I knew what they were doing, and I was able to get the materials in, and we started all the reading enough in advance that the students were a lot happier than we'd had before.
Right. So now you've been doing this for how long now?
Well, I don't do the tech center. What then was the tape center is now the technology center, and I haven't done that part of it for several years now. I'm still the Assistive Technology Specialist, but I now carry a caseload, which means that I work with about 150 or so students.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I now am also in charge of our personal assistance program, which is our program that we use with our severely physically disabled students. I coordinate that program where we hire personal assistants for our incoming students and help them learn how to work with them.
Right.
And these are student workers who help our students get up in the morning, go to bed at night, showering, grooming, that kind of assistance. We also have a personal assistance station on campus for the students to use for daytime bathroom assistance.
Okay, and are they, when you're talking about personal assistants, are they with them throughout most of the day?
No.
Getting them to and from classes or stuff?
No, not at all. This is strictly to help them get up in the morning and go to bed at night, and then the daytime assistance station too.
Oh, okay. And so now all of that has led you to this point where you've created Resiliency Counselor, correct?
Right. And in that time frame too, my husband has had health problems. Rob has had more health problems, and it's a matter of learning how to juggle and manage crises too, which I've gotten very good at. When there's a crisis in my office, I'm the one who can usually handle it quite well.
I'm sure when there's a crisis in your office, you're like, that's it? Do you know what I've been through?
Well, there were times when I would call my husband and I'd say, okay, Rob, we're headed to the emergency room. This is what's going on. And he'd hang up the phone, and in his office, they would be going, well, aren't you headed to the emergency room? He said, no, this is what's going to happen. It's going to take several hours before we get there. I'll go after work. And they're like, you're kidding. And he's like, no, it's okay. This is what we do. This is how we live. And people would think he was crazy that he wasn't just jumping up and leaving. But that's been part of our lives, is to deal with ERs and things like that. But you get used to that after a while, and that's been a part of what we do. And he would know that. Now, he would know if it was a life-threatening situation, I would have told him, and he would have immediately left. But since it wouldn't be, and he would know about what the timing would be, when he would need to hit there, and we would have answers. And then he developed some very severe health problems himself. And we went through cancer with him,
Right.
Radiation and chemo. And the good part was it cleared up his cancer, but the bad part was it finished off his kidneys. And we did dialysis at home. And it was actually the hemodialysis where you actually put the needles in and everything. I'd go home from work
Right.
and start his dialysis for him. And we'd do that in the evenings. It was a fun life. And then after almost 2 years of that, he developed dementia. And at that point, he had to go into assisted living, and
Right.
he passed away a year and a half ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
But it was his time.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, our lives have been filled with a lot of ups and downs. Sometimes that more down than up. It's one of those where you take one step forward and you feel like they're going two back.
Yeah.
And
I think
a
we've
lot
all
of that,
kind of been there,
we've
yeah.
all been there, and we've all gone through it. And sometimes you feel like that's all you do.
Right.
And we definitely went through that. But we always would come back out of it stronger than we were before it.
Right. And I think that's an important part of what you're going to help people do moving forward from this point, right? With
Absolutely,
with your new
because-
venture, Resiliency Counselor.
Absolutely, because that's what I want to share with people,
Right.
is that you can get through it, and that you can get through it stronger than you were before it started.
Right.
You don't have to live your life thinking that there is no hope, that things are never going to get better,
Right.
that things are always going to be bad, and that there is a bright side to things, and there is always hope, that there is always a brighter side to things, that there's always good things out there.
Yeah.
And that's something that I get across to my students at times,
Right.
that, you don't have to look at what's always going on around you, or that you think is going on around you, that there's always good things and better things to look at.
Right. Yeah, you just have to look for them sometimes.
You have to look for them, and sometimes it's not easy,
No.
which is one of the reasons why we brought up our son on comedy. Laughter is really an important part of life. We were given that ability for a reason.
Yeah.
It actually helps with your endorphins. It helps your overall well-being.
Yeah, and there is the phrase, laughter is the best medicine.
It is. It's incredible medicine.
Is that for a reason?
And with him, it stuck so well. I'll never forget this. He'd been with his foster family about a week, and they were having some friends over. And his foster mother called me, and she goes, I just want to know if this is something that Rob normally does or what? And I said, what happened? She had made a big bowl of Jell-O.
Okay.
And he was in the kitchen with her. And as she was carrying it across the kitchen floor, she tripped. And when she tripped, this big bowl of Jell-O flipped and landed on the floor.
Okay.
And he laughed so hard, he almost came out of his wheelchair. And she said, is that normal? And I said, oh, yeah, you have to understand. He's grown up on comedy, especially slapstick.
Right.
And when he was 5 years old, I would get a break around dinner time because he would be watching Three's Company with Jack Tripper.
Oh, there you go.
Yes. And I said, so of course he would laugh. And I said, he thinks when you do something like that, you're doing that for his entertainment.
Right.
And I said, so that's what he does. When you do something whereas you're tripping, you're falling, or anything like that, he's going to laugh.
Right.
Because he thinks that's funny. That's what he's grown up on, is slapstick. And that is great comedy. And we lose sight of that sometimes anymore because we don't have great people who do that kind of comedy anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So we forget sometimes that laughter is one of the best medicines we have.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of times it can really be, extremely helpful for people with depression, even stuff like cancer. From what I understand, there's one person. It's a story that I'm sure I've heard, and maybe it was a TV show or something where they were diagnosed and they're like, I'm not going to let this kill me. Just accept it. I'm going to enjoy my life as much as possible. I love comedies. They watched movies and stuff like crazy, and there was a healing that went on because of that.
There's an oncologist named Bernie Siegel. I don't know if he's still alive or not.
Okay.
But I read his book, one of his books about medicine and the healing parts about laughter.
Right.
And he did a study about it. He had one of his patients who watched Charlie Chan, who watched the Three Stooges. He got all those videos and just watched them hour after hour after hour, and his cancer disappeared.
Right.
And
you know what, that could be the story I heard.
It probably was. Yeah. And it really, because he was trying to figure out why some people survive and some people don't.
Right.
And one of the things that he pinpointed was the ability to laugh.
Right.
And be able to even look at yourself and laugh at yourself. And that's one of the things we also forget is we have to be able to laugh at ourselves and be able to laugh at life. Because, you know, sometimes it is humorous when you look back at it.
Oh, yeah.
At the moment that you're going through it, it is not funny.
Well,
okay?
I'm sure the woman that spilled the entire thing of Jell-O on the floor.
No, it wasn't funny to her, but it was really funny to Rob.
and it's funny to us. And
yeah,
we weren't
it's
even
very
there.
funny. That's right. And there's so much humor there. And I remember there was one time Rob was going around the campus practicing with his power chair.
Right.
And his chair was head controlled, okay? He had a joystick that was operated by his head. He was in my office after working with a job coach during the day, and his personal assistant would pick him up from my office, and they'd go tooling around the campus. Well, she picks him up from my office, and they go out, and he just immediately turns and heads into the men's restroom. She was not amused because she's standing on the outside, he's on the inside, and she's like, what the heck? So guy comes out of the restroom and she goes, is there anybody else in there aside from the kid in the wheelchair? Mm-hmm. And he goes, well, there's one guy in there, but he says you can go on in. So she goes in and she's like, what are you doing? So she disengaged his drives, pushed him out, got him into the hallway, re-engaged him, and lo and behold, he flips around and immediately goes back in. And she thinks he's playing a trick on her, and she was hot. She was really, really angry with him. So she goes in there, and she's letting him have it. My boss goes in there, who happened to use a wheelchair too, and he sees what's going on, and he's like, I don't think she needs any help from me. So he just turned around and left. Right. So she disengages his drive, pushes him to my office, and she's telling me what happened. And she's just letting him have it. And she says, I'm warning the person who's working tomorrow. I want to know who it is. To watch out with him with the restroom because he's going to take her in the restroom. And I asked him, how would he feel if I took him and sat him in the middle of the women's restroom? And I looked at her and I said, do you really think that would be a problem for a guy?
Right.
To have to stand in the middle of the ladies' restroom? And then I looked at him, and it was during the summer, and he wore an external catheter. So his leg bag was there, and I noticed it was full. And I said, Rob, were you trying to tell her you needed your leg bag emptied? And he said, yeah. And I said, so that's why you went in the men's restroom? He said, yeah. And I said, but you didn't understand that girls don't usually go in the men's restroom, did you? And he's like, they don't? And I said, no, they don't usually. But I reminded her that we had our personal assistant station downstairs that she could take him to do that. And I said, you can always use that. And she's like, oh. I'm still warning the person who comes in here tomorrow to take him that she needs to watch him. And I said, just go downstairs and use the PA station. I thought it was a riot. Right. And Rob actually incorporated...
I'm sure Rob thought it was pretty funny, too.
He did, too. He actually incorporated that into a comedy routine that he did the next summer during a comedy and disability program we did at Wright State. He did a competition, and he came in second with his. But he incorporated that in there because he didn't realize that girls don't go into the men's restroom. Right. He got quite a few laughs with that one, too. But we have to laugh at ourselves. Right. And that's what he was doing, was laughing at himself with that, because it was something he didn't know. We took it for granted that he would know that. Right. He didn't understand it, so we'd never talked to him about it, and not realizing it was something we needed to tell him. But that's something, laughter is such good medicine. Yeah. We have to use it. And that's something that I tell some of my students periodically, you need to laugh. You have to laugh at yourself. You have to laugh at what other people do too. Not at them, but with them. Right. We have to be careful how we use it. Yeah. But because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings when we laugh.
No.
But we also need to be able to use laughter because it is so healing.
Yeah, and it is very helpful, like you mentioned, with the the in particular story with the cancer that I had brought up. It's probably the same story.
It probably is.
And again, let me remind everybody, we're talking with Katherine Myers. She is the owner at Resiliency Counselor. ResiliencyCounselor.com is her website. 937-405-5795 is the phone number. If you want to reach out to her, she's going to be. This is a new thing for her. She's kind of taking this next step. She's starting to I guess look away from working at Wright State. You're looking at an exit point at some point, and you'll be available as a counselor to anyone who needs you on a full-time basis very soon.
Yes, I am.
But in the meantime, you are reaching out to people who need your help. And they can reach you again through the website, ResiliencyCounselor.com, or at the phone number 937-405-5795. Now, let me ask you about some of the people you have helped, because obviously through your years at Wright State, and of course since you started with Resiliency Counselor, you've had some interactions. You've been able to help some people, right?
I have. I had a student years ago with a very severe disability, physical disability, brilliant mind.
Right.
And that was one of her problems, but she was incredibly smart. She actually majored in Arabic, was part of her major, international studies. But she had a lot of problems with anger. If things didn't go her way, she would just fly off the handle.
Was she like 10 years old? Because I know a 10-year-old that acts like that.
No, she wasn't. And she was assigned to my caseload. Part of it was because they knew I could work with her parents.
Right.
But also felt like I had the experience with severe disability that I would be able to hopefully relate to her.
Right.
And so I started working with her and talking to her, and I was the one who could talk her down when she would get angry.
Now, what was her disability?
She had a severe physical disability. It was more along the lines of severe cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And I never actually saw what her diagnosis was.
Right.
She had a chair where she could actually stand up to help stretch her muscles. Her speech was perfect. Her intellectual level, her IQ was enormous. I mean, it was like 135, 140, so she had a very brilliant mind. And we finally actually had her work with our Counseling and Wellness Center, one of the psychologists out of there, to have a neuropsychological evaluation done on her to see if we could get a better handle on where she was with the anger, to help us deal with that better. And what we found out was with her IQ so high, she had some areas where she was actually average. And it was those average areas that was causing problems with her anger, because it was just enough below her regular functioning that it would frustrate her.
Right.
And that was why she was flying off the handle so much. But I was the one who was able to help talk her down. We got her working with our technology center. The tape center had changed over from tape recording to scanning.
Right.
And we actually put books into electronic format. We had changed over to that. We got her working with our tech center. She didn't scan books, but she actually did the editing. She was the only one in the campus who could do Arabic for us.
Oh, wow.
And we had students who were working on Arabic, and she could do that for us. She could do some of the older languages that no one else could touch.
Right.
And she was very meticulous about it, and she loved working. So I could use that as a tool with her and say, okay, you want to work? Yeah, well, we need to tone down the anger. And we would work on the different situations. Okay, what made you so angry?
Right.
And I would work with her, and by the time she graduated, we weren't having as many episodes as we had when I first started working with her. And I would refocus her, get her to look at different things, get her to look at the situation differently than it was when the anger would surface.
Right.
And she has her master's degree. She's working and doing quite well.
That's great.
So she's really doing a lot better than we ever thought she would. And when she went home to work on her master's degree for a while, we were able to actually email files to her and have her work for us for a while as a volunteer.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, she's done really, really well.
That's great. Now, is there anybody that you're currently working with that you can say, you know what, here's another example of how I can help somebody? Because again, the new company, you're taking a leap here. You've been working with Wright State for a while, but now you're an entrepreneur, Katherine.
I know. I have another one. This is another student. He has a lot of trouble with depression.
Okay.
And I've worked with him for a couple of years now.
Right.
And when he came to me this last time, I haven't seen much of him this semester. And he came to me.
Is that for a good reason? Because things are going well?
And he actually kept coming to me saying, I've been really busy, but
okay.
things are okay. And he would just pop into my office every week.
Right.
And he came to me at the end of the semester this time, and he said, you know what? I should have spent more time with you this semester. And I said, okay, let's talk. So we did. And he said, do you know how a couple years ago I was having some problems with depression? I said, yeah. And he said, well, I am again. And I said, well, let's talk about it. He said, I've just been going back to my room and holding up. And I said, well, you've been isolating yourself again. And he said,
right.
yeah. And I said, well, you know what we need to do differently? And he said, what? And I said, you need to do some volunteering and getting away from yourself. And he said, yeah. Because he's been looking for outlets,
right.
things that he could do. And I said, when you come back, and I'm going to research some things for you before you come back about some different student organizations. Most of our student organizations are required to do some kind of service learning projects.
Okay.
And I said, I'm going to look at who's doing the best for what you want to do,
right.
your interest, and we're going to look at them together when you return so you can pick which ones you're most interested in. And I said, but I think if you do some volunteering, that will get you around different people. I said, you keep talking about wanting a girlfriend. You want to meet somebody in a different circle than what you've been going around now.
Right. You can't meet a girlfriend if you're holed up in your room.
I said, that's true. And that's what I told him. I said, you really want to meet other people. You can't do that in your room.
Right.
And I said, I think volunteering is a good way for you to do that because it forces you out. And it forces you away from constantly looking at yourself.
Right.
And we've talked before, he's one where he looks at things and he pays too much attention to what's going on in the world that we have no control over. And we have to start talking about what's going on in his life that is good.
Right.
And this time I'm like, okay, we don't need to worry about what's good in your life because you know that. And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, let's look at what you can do that's good for other people this time. And he's like, okay, I like that idea. So we're going to do that next semester and see what happens with that.
That's a great approach because again, you're expanding that reach. Instead
mm-hmm.
of being holed up in his room where he's not going
right.
to have that interaction. Now. Did he find a girlfriend yet, or is he still looking?
He's looking. He is looking. And then I have another one. This one is a really different kind of situation.
Okay.
There's a young man that entered my life. Actually, I knew about him a couple years ago, and he was headed into being homeless. He's actually the son of a good friend of mine.
Okay.
And she could no longer have him stay with her because she's retired. She's in a retirement community.
Oh, okay.
And it's based on your income.
Right.
And they have a lot of controls over how long somebody can even stay with you. And he had been with her longer than he really should have been. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And it was a few months after my husband had passed away. And I looked at her and I said, for the first time in my life, I have a spare room. And she was like, well, that's not why I told you this. And I said, I know that, but for the first time in my life, I have a spare bedroom.
Right.
And I said, he can hang out there at least until he figures out what to do. And she's like, are you sure? Remember, he has 5 kids. And I said, well,
oh, wow.
Yeah, he's divorced.
Okay.
And his child support was eating him up, and that was the problem.
Right.
He did not have enough money to actually be able to afford any place. When you're paying child support on 5 children, that can be
it's quite a hit.
It is quite a hit. Yeah. And I said, just mention it to him and see. So she mentioned it to him, and then I was over at her place when he was there, and I mentioned it to him, and he said, are you sure? And I said, yes. And I said, think about it. So he finally came to me. We were at a program at our church that he was attending, and I'm a co-leader for.
Right.
And he said, okay, I'll take you up on your offer. And I said, okay. So he moved into my spare bedroom, and he eased me into his children being around slowly. And they're now around every other weekend, not all 5 at once, right, usually. But the interesting part of it is it's not just a matter of he has a roof over his head. I've been able to mentor him over time.
Right.
We talk about life. We talk about issues with his kids. We talk about better ways of managing. He's changed jobs a couple of times since he's been at my house. He's now in school.
Right.
And we talk about bettering yourself. And as a result, like I said, he's now in school. He's majoring in music ed at Wright State.
Oh, very nice.
He is working part-time. And his kids, I mentor also. They range in age from 8 to 17.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty big range.
It is a big range. The oldest 3 are 17, 16, and 14.
Right.
So they're clumped together, and then you have the 10 and 8-year-old. So it's a range, and it's opened my eyes about kids because I had one.
Right.
And I had one with a severe disability, and then I work with students with disabilities, so I'm very disability focused.
Right.
Although his kids have their own disabilities and issues, except for 2 of them, and one of them is gifted.
Right.
So it has really opened my eyes to what it's like to be around kids who are very normal, because I wasn't used to that. But it has been a mentoring situation for me with the kids as well.
That's great.
His oldest was planning to go to one college, and she's now decided to go to Wright State instead.
Oh, look at you.
Which is good.
Now you're upping the admissions at
Yes.
Wright State. Good for you.
Yes. And I wasn't really through anything that I said. I wanted her to make up her own decision, make
Right.
her own mind up. I did let her know what we had in the way of the major that she wanted. And she has made up her own mind on that. The kids are great. They definitely have their own issues. But it's...
Well, I think the most important part is the way now this gentleman is moving himself forward.
He is,
Right.
and that's the whole thing, is he's been able to find his niche through a lot of the talking that we have done together.
Right.
He's really trying to better himself, which is what he's wanted to do, but he's not had an avenue to be able to do it that has been safe for him and safe for his kids.
Right.
And I've been able to help offer him that and be able to help work with him on ways to do that. And originally when we started talking about school, it was going to be part-time and online, and going a totally different direction because he actually has a minister's license.
Right.
And he wanted to do more with theology. And he came to me about 6 months ago, and he said, I know what I want to do. And I said, what? He goes, I want to go to Wright State and major in music ed. And I was like, okay, that came out of left field.
Yeah.
That's a good one. And we spent a lot of time talking about it and where he was coming from on it, what he really wanted to do, and why he wanted to go that route. And it was actually what he had originally wanted to do a long time ago when he didn't go to school out of high school. And he really wanted to make his dream come true.
Right.
And we've worked out how to go about it and all. And he's really grown up a lot in the last, it's been 16 months since he moved in.
Very nice.
And there's been a lot of good positive changes for him.
So again, that's another benefit of, I would say, your experience, really, because your life experience,
Yes.
now you can take and translate that and be like, look, there are going to be things pushing against you. Nothing's going to be handed to anybody.
No.
You know? And
No.
resiliency, you gotta be able to bounce back from whatever life throws at you, right?
You have to be able to. Life is not kind. It isn't. There are tough knocks for everyone.
Right.
No one has an easy road. You can look around and you say, well, that person doesn't have any problems.
Right.
Well, that's not true. Everyone has problems. Everyone handles them differently. you might think someone has it made, but they don't.
Yeah, you don't see what they deal with.
You don't see
you
what
only
they
see
deal
the
with.
outside.
And sometimes you don't know about the problems, and you can even look at famous people. You don't know the problems they're dealing with until it hits the papers.
Right.
And they've actually had a very rough life. And what you think is a huge problem to you is a small problem to someone else.
Right.
And what you might think is a small problem for you is a huge problem for someone else.
Right.
My problems to me are, they're what I deal with. To me, they have become a matter of my life, okay? People look at me and they're like, oh my gosh, how have you managed to survive? Well, I know how I've managed to survive. It's my faith.
Right.
It's gotten me through everything that I've gone through. Without it, I would not have survived.
Right.
And okay, I know to the average person, it sounds like I've gone through huge things. And okay, they are huge. But I'm not going to minimalize the parent who has their child in for a tonsillectomy and getting getting tubes in their ears
Right.
for the very first time, and they're facing anesthesia for their child, when anesthesia is a big deal.
Yeah.
I don't care how old your child is. I don't care if this is the first time you've gone through that. That's a big deal.
Yep.
Okay? It's a big deal for any parent to go through. Just because you think, well, it's nothing like what you've gone through. Okay, maybe it's not, but it's a big deal for you.
Right.
And you have to know how to get through that. And you have to understand, okay, it is a big deal for you. And I'm not going to minimize that for you. So there is no truly small problems. We all have them.
Right.
But we all have to learn how to get through them. And that's what I want to work with people on.
Right.
Okay?
And now, in terms of, because you do mention your faith, is that part of what you do as well? Would you work with people on a faith basis as well?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
It
Okay.
can enter into it, but I can work with people of all walks of life.
Okay.
They do not have to be a Christian.
Right.
I do work with people of all backgrounds. And I have learned to respect people of all backgrounds
All right.
through the work that I do at Wright State. Everybody has a belief system in something.
Right.
We have to, because if you don't believe in something, what is there?
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, and I guess in a college setting, you're going to be dealing with people from all walks of life.
I do. And I have really learned since I've been there, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was brought there to learn,
Right.
was to respect people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all religious backgrounds. They're all wonderful people.
Right.
And they all have difficulties, and they all need to work on those difficulties. We all have things that we need to change in our lives, and that's what I'm here for,
Right.
is to help those people.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to reach out to Katherine Myers, she's been our guest. ResiliencyCounselor.com is her website. That's her new venture. You should reach out to her. Again, ResiliencyCounselor.com. 937-405-5795 is her name. Again, we thank you so much for your time today, Katherine. It's been enlightening, definitely. And to hear your story of the resiliency of the things you've gone through. And now you're able to take that experience and help anybody that comes your way, no matter where they're located, right? They don't have to be in Dayton.
No, they don't have to be in Dayton.
All right.
That's where technology comes in, and I'm also mobile for larger groups.
Well, there you go. So make sure to reach out to Katherine Myers. ResiliencyCounselor.com is the website, or 937-405-5795. And again, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.